Welcome back for a new box office edition, and this time we're going to be looking at a special off and on series of box office news that I will be working on. I'm going to call it Box Office Versus. Really, the main criteria for this little thing is first, it's going to be a battle between two movies. One, it has to be two movies I have personally seen, so I can give my own personal thoughts in. Um, we will be total looking at four main categories and try to decide which of the two movies is the better film. And we first look at basic info and everything, along with we look at domestic numbers or in general box office numbers. We look at scores on Rotten Tomatoes, as well as look at Metacritic scores and IMDb. So with that said, in the first edition, we are looking at going back to the late 90s, to specifically 1998. And it is a battle between two animated 3D films to see who made the better animated film about the bug or insect known as ants. So, with that said, and this is a battle between Antz, spelt with a Z rather than an S, versus the other one, A Bug's Life. Now, I can honestly say I saw both of these movies when they came to theater. So I saw both of them theatrically in actual theater. So, both have a bit of nostalgia, one more than the other. With that said, there's quite an interesting long backstory between these two may someday I'll talk about. But it's a battle between A Bug's Life, done by, of course, Pixar, at the time, of course, in charge, and one of the ones heavily involved in the development of A Bug's Life was, of course, John Lasseter. Now, in the other side, we have DreamWorks, which would create Antz. Now, there was a lot of word or war of opinions and mouths and stuff between the two, but at the end of the day, it's a reason why it ended up a battle. You can thank former head of Disney for not giving a promotion to Jeff, I believe it's Kessenberg or some, I forget his last name, but was looked over by at the time head of Disney, Michael Eisner. So we ended up having an interesting battle between these two creators. Eisenberg, which of course would go on to co-found, of course, DreamWorks. And we would get an interesting battle between two Ant films. But with that said, quickly mention in overall length, Antz was an hour and 23 minutes long, while A Bug's Life was an hour and 35 minutes. So, just 12-minute difference. Also, both released in 1998. First to be released was Antz. They would push it up to try to beat A Bug's Life. So, it would be released in 98 on October the 2nd. For Antz, A Bug's Life would later on be released on November the 20th. Antz had a budget of $105 million, while A Bug's Life's budget would be $120 million. Both pretty good sized budgets for. But then again, 3D is not cheap, especially in those days. So, total box office revenue, domestically, 52.8% of its total box office revenue would be domestic. Antz would do $90,757,863. Domestically, worldwide, it would end up doing $171,757,863. Not too bad. Now, it would definitely get beat by A Bug's Life at the box office. Domestically, A Bug's Life did $162,798,565. 44.8% of its box office revenue would be domestic. Worldwide, A Bug's Life would do $363,258,859. Now, then we look at Rotten Tomatoes, critic and audience scores. On Rotten Tomatoes, Antz would have a critic score of originally 96% critic score, though a more up to date version of the critic score shows Antz at 92%, while audience score was not as favorable with a 52% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. And now A Bug's Life would do a 92% among critics, so originally Antz actually got 4% higher critic score than Antz, or rather than A Bug's Life when it came out. Audience score would be a little more favorable for A Bug's Life with 73%. So it would end up doing 21% higher audience score. So obviously among normal moviegoers, people liked A Bug's Life a little bit more, though the demographic target for A Bug's Life was more family and younger kids. Antz was targeting more like older kids and teenagers, if you really look at the way the film was done also. Plus some little kids probably would have been scared maybe at one of the scenes in the Antz movie, that being the scene with the battle with the termites. With that said, Metacritic, Antz would end up with a 72% critic score on Metacritic and would have an 8 out of 10 among moviegoers. With A Bug's Life, it was 77% critic score, and audience score was a 7.8 out of 10. So in this case, the audience actually was 0.2 higher for Antz than A Bug's Life. So it shows the whole demographic probably is a little bit older with Metacritic. Then we look, last but not least, with IMDb. With it, Antz would get a 6.5 out of 10, and A Bug's Life would get a 7.2 out of 10. So not super high with either of them. Now, that is the overall info for this bout. Now, the final thought, my own personal opinion on the matter. I prefer A Bug's Life, I'll be honest. And for me personally, I've always considered A Bug's Life one of the more underrated Pixar films. It is arguably one of my personal favorites. Plus, I wasn't as big a fan of the main villain of Antz as much, though the voice work is actually pretty solid in both. But even if maybe not popular mention his name nowadays after some stuff involving him with the Me Too movement. But at the end of the day, one of the big things that really convinces me to enjoy A Bug's Life is, I think A Bug's Life has a better main villain, that being Hopper, of course, voiced by Kevin Spacey. I thought was a way better overall villain. Of course, rather than being a fellow ant being the main villain like an Antz, you go with a grasshopper. And overall, I just found the characters are more interesting, more variety and diversity on the different bugs and the characteristics and personalities of the bugs. So I like it because it was just more interesting all around. Antz is not a bad movie by any means, but for me personally, if I was to give it with my grading scale system, I'd probably give Antz maybe a C plus to maybe a B minus. I give A Bug's Life a flat A. Not an A plus, but a. I enjoyed it. But with that said, that was the first edition of Box Office Versus. So leave a comment below, tell me what maybe you'd like to see a battle between films in the future. I will say I will be working in the future on two specific future battles, and that being Charlie and the Chocolate Factory versus Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, as well as a battle between two movies that no stranger to, and that being none other than the Ten Commandments versus the Prince of Egypt. So with that said, I'll see y'all next time. Same YouTube time, same YouTube channel. Stay safe. And hopefully you enjoyed this edition on the Goku Report. See you next time.